Viewer discretion advised. This episode contains disturbing descriptions of real historical atrocities. The hill outside Weimar looks peaceful now. Pines sway in the wind, the birds sing, and the ruins of a stone gate stand quiet, like the mouth of something that once devoured the living. But in the winter of 1941, that same hill was a kingdom of death, and the woman who ruled over it was known by one name whispered among prisoners: the Witch of Buchenwald. They said her laughter carried through the fog, that when her dogs barked, someone disappeared, that she rode a horse around the camp in tall black boots, her red hair blazing like fire against the snow. Her name was Ilse Koch, the wife of the camp commandant, and, as survivors would later testify, one of the most terrifying figures in all of Nazi Germany. To the outside world, she was a model wife, elegant, smiling, wearing pearls. To those behind the wire, she was death disguised as a woman. It began, like all horrors do, quietly. Prisoners noticed she had an unusual fascination with tattoos. She would walk by work details, her eyes scanning bare backs and arms, stopping when she saw something beautiful: a serpent, a rose, a woman's name inked in blue. She would point, and that man would vanish. Later, when the Americans liberated the camp, they found something in her house: lampshades, book covers, gloves, each of them, it was said, made from the tanned skin of human beings. Some had faint traces of tattoos, like ghosts trapped beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether all of it was true, or if the legend grew larger than reality. But for those who lived through Buchenwald, the horror didn't need proof. They had seen her smile. Ilse Koch was not a soldier. She never pulled a trigger or gave military orders. But she possessed something far more dangerous: power without empathy. She was the mirror of her husband's cruelty, and together they turned Buchenwald into a private kingdom of sadism and fear. The villa where they lived still stands. It overlooks the valley with a view of the crematorium. From her balcony, Ilse could see the smoke rising each morning. She liked that view, survivors said. It made her feel important. Imagine the evenings there, the clink of crystal glasses, the sound of a gramophone playing Strauss, laughter echoing through marble halls, while just beyond the window, men screamed in the cold. Her dogs were fed meat that the prisoners could only dream of. Her dresses came from Paris, her perfumes from Vienna. And when she wanted to entertain guests, she would summon her workers, broken, starving men forced to serve at her table. Some say she believed beauty could be carved out of suffering, that she found a twisted kind of art in pain. Others think she was simply a reflection of the system that created her, a woman who learned that cruelty could be power, and power could be pleasure. Years later, during her trial, she would deny everything. She claimed the lampshades were made from goat leather, the accusations a lie invented by prisoners. But the witnesses remembered. They remembered her riding her horse through the camp, her whip slicing the air. They remembered her smile when the dogs tore into a man. And they remembered the house, full of objects no one dared to look at too long. When the Americans entered Buchenwald in April 1945, General Patton himself walked through the camp. He saw the piles of bones, the ovens still warm, the corpses stacked like firewood. And he saw the house on the hill. The photographs taken there became infamous: lamps, shrunken heads, tattooed skin preserved in glass jars. Whether every piece came from her orders or not, the symbol was born. Ilse Koch, the human lampshade, the Witch of Buchenwald, became one of the faces of the Third Reich's evil. But this story is not just about her. It's about what happens when ordinary people are given absolute power over life and death, and choose death. It's about the silence that follows cruelty, the kind that seeps into walls and never leaves. Because the villa still stands. The rooms are empty, the lights long gone. But if you listen, the wind through the broken windows sounds almost like laughter. Before she became the Witch of Buchenwald, she was simply Ilse, a secretary from Dresden, a girl who liked riding horses, reading romance novels, and dressing well. She wasn't born a monster. But like so many in that time and place, she was shaped by a world that worshipped obedience and despised weakness. Ilse Koch was born in 1906, the daughter of a factory foreman. Her childhood was gray, disciplined, ordinary. Her parents believed in order, not affection. In school, she was described as quiet, serious, with a sharp sense of pride. She wanted more than what the cramped apartment and the smell of oil and smoke could give her. She wanted to rise above it. In 1932, as Germany's streets filled with brown uniforms and angry slogans, Ilse found her way to the National Socialist Party. She joined, not out of ideology, but ambition. The SS promised structure, belonging, and power. That's where she met Karl Koch, an officer with cold eyes and a perfect uniform. He was everything she thought a man should be: decisive, fearless, respected. They married a year later. It was a match made in the shadow of the swastika. In the early days, Ilse was the charming wife at social gatherings, standing beside her husband as he climbed through the ranks. She learned how to move in that world, how to flatter, how to intimidate, how to command attention without speaking too loudly. But beneath the polite smiles, something darker stirred. She loved the way soldiers looked at her, the way prisoners flinched when she passed. Power, she realized, could make people beautiful. Power could make her feel alive. When Karl was appointed commandant of Buchenwald concentration camp in 1937, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. The camp wasn't just a prison. It was a world without rules, built entirely on fear. And in that world, Ilse could finally become who she truly was. The Kochs moved into a luxurious villa on the edge of the camp. From the balcony, you could see the gates, the watchtowers, and the thick forest beyond. A forest that would soon hide thousands of bodies. Inside, the house was a reflection of Ilse's hunger for control. Velvet curtains, silverware, porcelain. She ordered fresh flowers every morning. The furniture was polished until it shone like glass. And always, the faint hum of music from her gramophone, Strauss, Wagner, or Schubert, blending with the distant cries from the barracks. She walked through the camp as if through her garden. Prisoners had to lower their eyes when she passed. If one dared to look, he risked a beating. Some said she carried a whip, others a riding crop. Her boots gleamed. Her smile, never warm, was the kind that promised punishment. It didn't take long for rumors to start. They said she had taken a liking to the tattooed prisoners, that she found the ink fascinating, especially when it was drawn across living flesh. The SS guards began to compete for her favor, presenting her with gifts taken from the dead. A lampshade here, a pair of gloves, a book with a cover so soft it didn't feel like leather. There were parties too, evenings filled with laughter, champagne, and the smell of burning flesh drifting from the crematorium. Officers told jokes while the glow from the furnaces lit the horizon red. Ilse would stand at the piano, a glass in hand, her hair catching the firelight. To her guests, she was the perfect hostess. To the men in the camps, she was a nightmare given form. She liked to watch executions, punishments, experiments. She would attend them as if they were performances. Sometimes, she'd bring her dogs, great mastiffs trained to kill. She would release them with a flick of her hand, then stand still as screams filled the air. And when it was over, she'd return home to dine with her husband. There's a word survivors used for her, Die Hexe, the witch, because she didn't need to raise her voice or carry a gun. Her power came from something colder, indifference, the kind that sees suffering not as tragedy, but as entertainment. But monsters, even those in uniforms, eventually fall. By 1943, whispers of corruption reached Berlin. Karl Koch had been embezzling from the Reich, stealing gold, art, and valuables taken from prisoners. He had also ordered the murder of his own subordinates to cover it up. When the SS came to investigate, Ilse tried to charm them. She hosted dinners, smiled sweetly, pretended ignorance. But her arrogance had gone too far. Her husband was arrested and executed by his own comrades. For the first time, Ilse found herself without protection. Yet the war dragged on, and the machinery of death kept turning. She stayed at Buchenwald, still feared, still obeyed. Until 1945, when the gates finally opened, and the world saw what she had helped build. When American troops liberated the camp, they forced the citizens of Weimar to walk through it, to see what had been done in their name. Some fainted, some vomited. And in the villa, they found what would make Ilse Koch infamous forever: objects that defied comprehension. The investigators cataloged everything: human skin with tattoos, lampshades, shrunken heads displayed like trophies. Reporters called her the Beast of Buchenwald, the Lady of the Lampshade, the Red Witch. During her trial in Dachau, Ilse sat quietly, her hair perfectly arranged, her lips painted red. She denied everything. She said the lampshades were made of goatskin. She said the witnesses were liars. But when the photographs were shown, when survivors described her laughter, her cruelty, the courtroom fell silent. She was sentenced to life in prison. Years later, after appeals, her sentence was briefly reduced, but public outrage brought it back. She spent the rest of her life behind bars, aging in solitude. In 1967, she tied a bedsheet to the bars of her cell and hanged herself. The note she left for her son was short: "I can't go on living with this disgrace." But history had already decided her place. Ilse Koch became a symbol, not just of female cruelty, but of what happens when ideology and sadism meet luxury. Her name turned into a legend whispered across decades, feeding both truth and myth. Some historians debate whether every object attributed to her was real, but the survivors didn't care about the details. For them, she would always be the woman who smiled while men burned. In the ruins of Buchenwald today, the villa still overlooks the valley. The wind moves through the empty windows, and the forest beyond remains eerily quiet. Tourists come, cameras click, and guides tell the story of the woman who turned death into decoration. And somewhere between fact and horror, between evidence and legend, her ghost lingers, not to haunt, but to remind. Because evil doesn't always roar or shout. Sometimes it wears perfume, plays music, and smiles. The house still stands, on a hill above Weimar, hidden behind trees that have grown thick over the decades. It looks almost ordinary now, like any old German villa. But if you step closer, if you stand in front of its cracked windows and let the wind whisper through the broken panes, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of laughter, the clinking of glass, and the distant screams that once carried across the valley. That house was Ilse Koch's paradise. And for thousands of people below the hill, it was the edge of hell. From the balcony, she could see everything: the gates of Buchenwald, the rows of barracks, the watchtowers, and beyond them, the smoke from the crematorium rising in thin black ribbons against the gray sky. The view that made others turn away filled her with pride. "It's all running well," she once told a visitor, smiling as if she were speaking about a factory. The villa was her domain, a world separated from the filth and suffering by just a few meters of fence and barbed wire. Inside, carpets muffled the sound of her heels. The air smelled of perfume and roasted meat. Music floated from the gramophone: Schubert's Serenade, Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. It was her ritual: beauty, layered over horror, civilization sitting comfortably on top of death. Servants, prisoners really, polished the floors, cleaned the windows, cooked her meals. They wore rags, but were expected to behave like hotel staff. They never spoke unless spoken to. They never looked her in the eyes. If they dropped a dish, they might vanish the next morning. In the afternoons, Ilse would ride her horse along the wire fence, the dogs trotting beside her. Prisoners froze when she appeared, the red hair, the leather gloves, the whip. She enjoyed watching them flinch, their faces tightening, as if the air itself could punish them. Sometimes she stopped to ask their numbers, sometimes she didn't. Either way, they never forgot her. Evenings at the villa were a performance. Officers came from nearby towns, their uniforms pressed, their boots shining. The dining room glowed with candlelight. There were flowers on the table, lilies or roses, depending on the season, and a feast prepared by hands that trembled from hunger. Ilse sat at the head of the table. She was always perfectly composed, her hair set in waves, her dress tailored to fit her body like armor. She laughed easily, her voice soft and bright, a sound that didn't belong in that place. The men adored her. She had the kind of confidence that made cruelty look elegant. Sometimes she made jokes about the work going on below. Sometimes she didn't mention it at all. But the glow from the crematorium always seeped through the curtains, painting their laughter in shades of orange and ash. One story from the survivors still circulates. During a dinner party, a new SS officer noticed a strange lamp in the corner of the living room. Its shade was pale, almost translucent. When the light hit it just right, faint lines appeared, like veins. The officer complimented her taste. Ilse smiled and said, "It's unique, isn't it?" Was it real? Or was it legend? The truth has blurred with time. But what matters is what it represented, the boundary she crossed and the system that let her do it. Every morning, she received reports about the camp's output. The numbers came neatly typed, efficient: arrivals, deaths, cremations. She read them the way one reads household accounts. Her husband, Carl, obsessed over discipline and profit. She obsessed over appearances. Together, they created a perfect storm. Bureaucracy fused with sadism, precision married to perversion. Ilse redecorated constantly. She ordered new fabrics from Weimar, new furniture from Leipzig. The villa's garden was tended by prisoners who planted roses while the ashes of their comrades fell from the sky. She held tea parties there. Children of officers played tag between the hedges, while skeletal figures shoveled dirt beyond the fence. But cruelty, like any addiction, demands escalation. When the thrill of power became dull, she sought new sensations, new ways to prove her control. Prisoners spoke of her sudden inspections, of her dogs attacking without warning, of her walking into the infirmary just to watch. And always that smile, that terrifying calm smile. Some prisoners said she had a collection of tattooed skins, preserved, displayed, admired. Others said it was her husband's doing, that she simply enjoyed the results. The truth may never be known, but the myth was already stronger than fact. Even among the guards, her name was whispered with unease. In 1942, the villa began to change. The war was turning. Shortages appeared. The music grew quieter. But Ilse's rituals continued. She still rode through the camp, still entertained guests. Yet her face hardened. The elegant woman of 1939 was now something else. Cold, restless, brittle. Sometimes she sat alone in the drawing room, staring at the hills. Sometimes she screamed at the servants for no reason at all. Her husband's corruption was catching up with them. Rumors spread, gold, diamonds, paintings stolen from prisoners. People were disappearing not just in the camp, but within the SS ranks themselves. Carl grew paranoid. Ilse drank more. The villa, once their throne, began to feel like a trap. When the SS finally came to investigate, the scene must have looked grotesque. A woman in silk, standing before a house built on death, insisting on her innocence. But by then, even her beauty couldn't save her. Her husband was executed in 1945, shot by his own people for crimes that went beyond even their tolerance. And Ilse? She stayed. She lived through the final winter of the war in that house, surrounded by ghosts. The music stopped. The servants were gone. The garden was dead. She watched the smoke still rise from the chimneys and refused to believe the world outside was ending. When the Americans arrived, they found her villa almost untouched, the furniture gleaming, the floors polished, the curtains drawn. It was as if she had been waiting for them. A U.S. officer who entered the villa later wrote in his diary, "It was the strangest place I've ever seen. Elegant, silent, and evil, like a mask stretched over a corpse." They took photographs. They gathered evidence. They brought her down the hill to face the camp survivors. Some screamed when they saw her. Others stared in silence, unable to understand how someone so human could have been so monstrous. When the trial began, journalists swarmed around her like flies. The Witch of Buchenwald, the woman who made lamps from skin. She denied everything. She blamed her husband. She smiled for the cameras. But the villa, the hill, and the ashes spoke louder than she ever could. Today, the rooms are empty. Dust lies thick where her silverware once gleamed. The wind moves the curtains like ghosts. Visitors who come to Buchenwald rarely climb that hill. It's not part of the official tour. But those who do say there's a heaviness there, something you can't quite name. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's guilt. The villa overlooking death has no lights now, only silence. And the knowledge that somewhere, once, a woman stood on that balcony and called it beautiful. April 1945. The gates of Buchenwald stood open for the first time in 8 years. What the American soldiers saw inside would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Bodies, piled like lumber. The smell of death baked into the earth. The skeletal faces of the living. Eyes too large, movements too slow, staring in disbelief at men in clean uniforms. Among the survivors, a rumor spread quickly. She's still here. The woman with the red hair. The witch on the hill. When they found her, Ilse Koch was not hiding. She was in her house, the villa that looked down upon the camp, wearing a neat gray dress, her hair carefully brushed. To the soldiers who arrested her, she looked like an ordinary woman. But when they brought her down to the camp, when the prisoners saw her, the air filled with screams. Men who had survived starvation and torture suddenly trembled like children. Some tried to attack her. Others spat at the ground where she stood. One American officer wrote in his report, "I've never seen such hatred in human eyes, not even toward Hitler himself." The U.S. Army began documenting everything. They photographed the crematorium, the torture rooms, the evidence taken from her home, the lampshades, the pieces of tattooed skin, the shrunken heads displayed on her husband's desk, trophies of a kingdom built on agony. Whether every artifact was truly hers didn't matter. In that moment, Ilse Koch became a symbol of everything the world wanted to punish. The Dachau trials began in 1947. Inside the courtroom, the light was cold and white. Rows of journalists, soldiers, and survivors filled the benches. On the first day, Ilse entered wearing a plain suit, her hair pinned back, her expression calm. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap. When the interpreter read out the charges, torture, murder, crimes against humanity, she didn't flinch. Reporters described her as composed, even graceful. One wrote, "She looked like a schoolteacher listening to a lesson that did not concern her." The survivors were called to the stand, one by one. They told stories that broke the courtroom open. Stories of her dogs tearing men apart for sport, of her choosing prisoners with tattoos, of her laughter as they were led away. Some fainted as they spoke, others wept. A few, too numb for tears, simply recited the facts. When asked to respond, Ilse said quietly, "They are all lying." But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses described her parties, the trophies, the punishments. One man swore he had tanned human skin under her orders. Another said she had forced him to make lampshades. The judges listened in silence. Outside the courtroom, crowds gathered. Newspapers printed her face beside the words, "The Beast of Buchenwald." To the public, she wasn't just guilty. She was evil incarnate. The idea of a woman committing such crimes ignited a kind of collective fury. Men like Himmler or Goebbels were monsters. But Ilse Koch, a mother, a wife, represented something even more disturbing. She blurred the line between victim and predator, between civilization and horror. People needed her to be punished, not just for what she did, but for what she symbolized. When the verdict came, it was almost anticlimactic. Life imprisonment. The courtroom was silent. She blinked once, nodded, and was led away. That should have been the end. But history rarely gives monsters clean exits. In 1949, after 2 years behind bars, her sentence was suddenly reduced to just 4 years. The Americans were shifting their priorities. The Cold War had begun, and the new enemy was the Soviet Union, not the ghosts of the Reich. Dozens of Nazi officers were quietly released to rebuild Germany's administration. Ilse Koch, it seemed, was no longer useful to keep imprisoned. When the news broke, the reaction was explosive. Veterans protested in the streets. Survivors wrote letters. One headline read, "The Witch Walks Free." Under immense pressure, the case was reopened, this time by a German court. She was arrested again in 1950 and retried. The witnesses came back, older now, but still carrying their memories like open wounds. They told the same stories, the same cruelty, the same smile. This time, the judges had no doubt. Ilse Koch was sentenced to life imprisonment once more. Prison did not break her, at least not at first. She had her own cell in the women's block at HX prison in Bavaria. The guards described her as polite, distant, meticulous about her appearance. She kept her hair dyed, her nails clean, her bed perfectly made. She still carried herself like a woman of status, as if the walls were merely a temporary inconvenience. Occasionally, she received letters from admirers, men who saw in her not a criminal, but a misunderstood symbol. Some called her the German Joan of Arc. She replied rarely, always in careful handwriting, always with a tone of superiority. But time erodes even arrogance. As the years passed, the world moved on. New wars began. New dictators rose. The memory of Buchenwald faded into history books. Visitors still came to the memorial. But Ilse's name became just another line in the archive. In prison, her hair turned gray. Her eyesight dimmed. The other inmates avoided her. Some guards mocked her quietly, calling her Frau Lampenschirm, Mrs. Lampshade. She stopped writing letters. She stopped talking altogether. By 1967, she was a ghost in her own cell, overweight, sick, and utterly forgotten. On a cold night in September, she tore a sheet from her bed, tied it to the bars, and stepped onto a chair. She was found hanging there at dawn. She was 61 years old. In her hand was a small folded note addressed to her son. "I can't go on living with this disgrace. Forgive me." Her body was buried in an unmarked grave. No visitors, no flowers, no mourners. But her story refused to die. Over the years, her name has resurfaced again and again, in books, in films, in whispers. Some argue that the legend of Ilse Koch grew beyond truth, that the lampshades were never proven to be human skin. Others say that even if the myth exaggerated the details, it revealed a deeper reality, the moral rot at the heart of Nazi cruelty. Because, whether every rumor was fact or fiction, one thing remained undeniable. She ruled a place where human life had no value, and she did it without mercy. When visitors walk through Buchenwald today, they sometimes ask where her villa stood. The guides point toward the trees and say quietly, "Up there." There's nothing left of it now, only foundations and silence. But the air feels heavy, as if the ground remembers. In the museum, behind glass, there is a single photograph of her, standing beside her husband, both smiling, the camp visible in the background. A perfect couple. The caption beneath it is simple: Ilse Koch, wife of the commandant, responsible for crimes against humanity. That's all history needs to say, because monsters like her don't disappear. They linger, not as ghosts, but as warnings. They remind us that cruelty doesn't always wear a uniform, and evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, adjusts a pearl necklace, and calls itself civilized. The cell was small, 6 steps long, 4 steps wide, and cold even in summer. The walls sweated with moisture. The air carried that faint metallic scent of rust and despair. The guards called it Block 2A, but for Ilse Koch, it was the entire world. In that gray box of concrete and steel, the woman who once lived in a villa above a concentration camp now woke each morning to the sound of keys turning and footsteps echoing down the corridor. Gone were the silk curtains, the gramophone, the laughter of officers. Gone was the view of the valley and the dark line of smoke from the crematorium. Now, there was only the rattle of the food cart and the whisper of the guards. That's her, the witch. She kept her cell tidy. The bed was always made tight enough to bounce a coin. The metal wash basin gleamed. On the small wooden table, she arranged the few things she was allowed: a comb, a tin cup, a Bible she never opened, and a broken mirror. That mirror was the only thing left from her old life. The glass was cracked, its surface dim, but she still looked into it every morning. For hours, as if trying to find the woman she once was, or to make sure she was still there. The guard said she rarely spoke. When she did, her voice was calm, almost polite. She asked about the weather, about her son, about the flowers blooming in the courtyard. She never mentioned Buchenwald, not once. But silence doesn't erase memory. It amplifies it. And in that silence, her past began to speak. At night, she dreamed of the villa. She saw herself on the balcony again, the sun on her face, the dogs barking below. The music drifted through open doors. And then, without warning, the scene would twist, the sky turning red, the smoke rising thick and black, the laughter replaced by screams. She woke drenched in sweat, her hands shaking. Sometimes she whispered names, prisoners, guards, her husband. Sometimes she laughed in her sleep. Other nights, she refused to close her eyes. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the door as if expecting someone to walk in. One of her victims, perhaps. Or the boy she'd lost to the war. One of the guards later said, "She looked like she was waiting for something to come for her. Maybe it finally did." The prison psychiatrist visited her once a month. He described her as intelligent, self-contained, capable of extreme denial. When he asked if she felt remorse, she smiled faintly. "I followed orders," she said. "I kept the house in order. Others did worse." He pressed further. "But you saw it, didn't you? The killings, the experiments, the smoke." "Everyone saw it," she answered. "No one stopped it." The doctor wrote in his notes, "Complete dissociation, refuses moral responsibility, projects guilt outward." But he missed something. Something quieter, deeper, festering beneath her composure. Ilse Koch wasn't simply denying guilt. She was drowning in it. Years turned into decades. The post-war world rebuilt itself. Germany was split in two. The names of camps faded into history books. The survivors aged, their voices trembling when they spoke of the red-haired woman who rode through Buchenwald like death on horseback. In her cell, Ilse aged too. Her hair turned white, her face bloated, her eyesight dimmed. The elegance that once defined her became grotesque, a mask collapsing under its own weight. But every morning, she still looked into the mirror. Sometimes, she would mutter to her reflection, "It wasn't me." Other times, "I was beautiful once." And sometimes, she said nothing at all, just stared until her breath fogged the glass, until her reflection blurred into a shadow. The guards began to avoid her. There was something unnerving about the way she watched them. Not with anger, but curiosity, as if studying them for weakness. She still had that faint air of command, that habit of control. Even stripped of power, she carried its ghost. One young guard recalled a winter morning when he brought her breakfast. She sat by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sunlight made the frost on the bars sparkle like diamonds. "Do you ever hear them?" she asked. "Hear who?" "The ones outside." He didn't understand. "They're always singing," she said softly. "At night, when it's quiet, I can hear them from the forest." He left the tray untouched. Later, he told his superior he didn't want the assignment anymore. There's a saying among those who've seen too much horror: the mind protects itself by creating ghosts. Maybe that's what happened to her. Maybe the silence of that cell opened a door she couldn't close. Because what she began to hear wasn't just noise, it was memory. Amplified, multiplied, twisted. The creak of a bunk bed became the cracking of bones. The wind through the vent became the screams of the dying. The smell of disinfectant turned into the stench of burning flesh. The cell became her own concentration camp. And she was both prisoner and commandant. In 1967, the end came quietly. There was no storm, no final confession, no audience. Just the slow erosion of a mind that had built its own cage. That morning, the guard on duty noticed her door still closed past roll call. He called her name. No answer. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Ilse Koch was hanging from the bars of her cell window, a bedsheet tied tightly around her neck. Her feet dangled above the floor, her shadow long and still against the wall. On the table lay the mirror, shattered into pieces. The note beside it was written in a careful, almost elegant hand. "I can't go on living with this disgrace. Forgive me." No one did. They buried her in an unmarked grave on the edge of the prison grounds. No priest, no family, no visitors. The dirt closed over her quietly, as if the earth itself didn't want to remember. But memory is stubborn. It refuses to stay buried. Years later, journalists and historians returned to Buchenwald. They walked through the gates, stood among the ruins, and tried to understand. They asked the same question over and over. How could she? Was she born evil, or was she made by the system that rewarded cruelty, that taught people to see others as less than human? The answer is never simple. Evil rarely is. Because Ilse Koch wasn't a monster from birth. She was a woman who discovered that in a world built on obedience, cruelty could feel like power, and power could feel like love. She became what the Reich wanted her to be: efficient, ruthless, loyal. And when the world gave her the chance to look away, she looked and smiled. The horror of her story isn't only in what she did, it's in what she reveals about the rest of us, about how easily decency can be twisted into obedience, how ordinary people can learn to live beside evil and call it normal. How the line between order and chaos, between civilization and barbarity, can vanish in a single heartbeat. For every Ilse Koch, there were hundreds who looked the other way. The doctors who signed the reports, the secretaries who typed the orders, the neighbors who smelled the smoke and closed their windows. The system didn't need monsters. It created them. And when the war ended, when the smoke cleared, the world wanted to believe that people like Ilse were different, exceptional, born wicked, because that made it easier to sleep at night. But maybe the real horror is that she wasn't different at all. The villa overlooking Buchenwald is gone now. The trees have reclaimed the hill. Tourists walk the paths below, taking pictures of memorials and plaques. The air smells clean again. But if you stand there at dusk, when the light begins to fade and the forest grows quiet, you can almost feel it. That weight. That silence that remembers. Some say evil leaves traces, not ghosts but impressions, like fingerprints pressed into the world. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's why certain places never feel peaceful again. There's one final story the guides sometimes tell. Years ago, during restoration work, a worker found a piece of glass buried near the villa's foundations. A shard of a mirror, small, cracked, but intact. When he picked it up, he saw his reflection split into two halves. One clear, one distorted. He kept it for a while, then threw it away. He said he didn't like the way it looked back at him, because that's the legacy of Ilse Koch. Not the lampshades, not the myths, not the trials. It's the mirror she left behind, the one that forces us to ask, what would we have done in her place? Would we have looked away? Or would we have stood on that balcony and called it beautiful? When we talk about Buchenwald, about Auschwitz, about all the camps and the faces and the numbers, we like to think that evil is something far away, something that lived and died in another century. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. Evil isn't buried in history. It's waiting, quiet, civilized, polite, in every place where people trade empathy for obedience and conscience for comfort. Ilse Koch's story isn't just about her. It's about what happens when a system teaches you that cruelty is order, that silence is virtue, that the screams outside your window are none of your concern. That's how monsters are made. The human lampshade of Buchenwald is not just a tale of one woman's depravity. It's a reflection of a world that let her exist. A reminder that horror doesn't end when the war does. It lingers in silence and indifference in the places where people choose not to see. So the next time someone tells you that evil wears horns or hides in shadows, remember this. Sometimes it wears pearls. Sometimes it hosts dinner parties. And sometimes it looks in the mirror and smiles.